This is part one of a 7-part series about a proposed rewrite of Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Bylaws. Article 2 is where the UU principles and sources are enumerated, as well as defining the primary purposes of the National UU Association, a commitment to inclusion, and a protection against infringement of individual freedom of belief. When the proposed rewrite was preliminarily approved at General Assembly last June, the consistent refrain from UU leaders and delegates was that they were voting to continue the conversation about what UU is going to be about. In Part 1, we find that so many proposed changes lead to so many questions. But before we dive in, we reflect on the unique role UU members play in this process.
Have you ever thought about what makes Unitarian Universalism unique?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is individual freedom of belief. Every member of UU can believe what they must. I think that makes UU unique.
Individual freedom of belief certainly is a fundamental part of what being in UU is about. But I was thinking of something else that I think makes UU unique.
Oh, I bet I know what's on your mind. The other thing that makes UU truly unique is that all decisions about this religion are in the hands of its members.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Every voice matters in UU. That comes from our 4th and 5th principles.
Right. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning, plus the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations. Together, they make UU unique.
Speaking of our principles, I assume you have heard that the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, finished the review of Article 2 in the UUA bylaws. They have to do a review at least every 15 years.
Yes, I saw that the UUA is proposing a major rewrite of Article 2. The proposal got preliminary approval at General Assembly last June. A second vote is scheduled for GA in June of 2024.
I am a little overwhelmed by how much they want to change. It seems like everything they want to add makes me ask, what does this mean? Everything they delete makes me ask, why do they want to remove this?
I had the same reaction. This is a lot bigger change than I expected. The first thing we notice is that the principles would be replaced by values and covenant, and they would be a lot more verbose. There would be 3 times as many words.
The principles that make UU unique, the 4th and 5th, are kind of buried in there. It's like a game of where are my principles? The 4th principle is buried in the pluralism value. The 5th principle is buried under the justice value. And our 1st principle, which many members think is our most important principle, is now listed last. Will it still be obvious to potential members what makes UU unique? I can't imagine putting these value statements on a poster on the wall, if you know what I mean. They did the opposite with the sources. The current list of specific sources of inspiration would be replaced. It would not be a list anymore in the proposed rewrite. It's more general.
I see what you mean. I really like seeing the sources of my beliefs mentioned by name as specifically being welcome in the current version. Why would the UUA want to get rid of something that actually attracts lots of new members?
When I think back, the principles and sources were what drew me to UU. I liked the mix of spiritual and intellectual inspiration, along with the aspirations to work to make our world a better place.
It was the same for me. It feels like the rewrite would change the mix of what we focus on. I see less emphasis on personal spiritual and intellectual growth and more emphasis on collective action.
The UUA wouldn't be proposing such a major change if it wasn't intended to have a major impact on all of UU. But what is the goal of all of these changes? The Article 2 Study Commission wants to change a lot more than just the principles and sources. For instance, they want to change the purpose of the UUA, so it no longer says that their primary purpose is to serve the needs of its member congregations. Why are they doing that?
I don't know. It looks intentional. It seems like this will change the distribution of power in UU, but it is hard to see what the intention really is. I am also wondering why they are removing the explicit protection against infringement upon individual freedom of belief, leaving only a vague reference to our UU heritage.
Merely referring to our heritage, our past, is not the same thing as a firm commitment, going forward. And it does not even mention individual freedom of belief as being central to our heritage. This does not just seem like poor writing, the vagueness seems intentional. But what is the intention behind abandoning individual freedom of belief?
You make a good point about the intentional vagueness of referring to UU's heritage. An individual's right of conscience is in the fifth principle, but in the rewrite is only something UU affirmed in the past. Congregational freedom is also explicitly confirmed in the current principles, but not in the rewrite. It concerns me that they are removing the firm commitment to both of those foundational principles in the rewrite.
And why add a caveat in the inclusion section, saying we welcome all persons who share our values? The section name is inclusion, not exclusion. This seems like a deliberate rejection of the liberal value of tolerance.
Obviously, there are actions that are not welcome. Tolerance never meant anything goes. But adding a caveat like this could have unintended consequences. This statement as written could be used to exclude persons who we disagree with. Kicking people out because we disagree is not what UU is about.
That reminds me of something our new UUA president said at a workshop at General Assembly in 2022. She said, "We have to be willing to say no in UU spaces, willing to say to each other, you are out of covenant right now. You are so out of covenant, you cannot be back in this community until you're willing to do the work of repair. You cannot break this community, over and over again, out of your, whatever it is, trauma, fear, anger, loss, despair? I mean, those are pastoral issues. You can always come home, but you got to come correct. That's a covenant. I'm sorry, but this is not what I would call beloved community. This is an outright rejection of tolerance of alternative points of view. Our new UUA president's approach to covenant makes me really concerned about that caveat in the inclusion section, where it says we welcome all persons who share our values. That also makes me concerned about adding a whole bunch of new covenants. Every value will have its own covenant. It seems like they are trying to dictate what our priorities will be.
This just feels so heavy-handed. This feels so paternalistic. The current principles are aspirational. Inserting new covenants into each value statement turns the aspirations into dictates. Dictates turn aspirations into tests we have to pass. I don't think dictates are the right way to build a beloved community.
There is also a new overall covenant that is worded very differently. Will our congregations now have direct covenants with the UUA? That would also redistribute power in UU. It is not clear to me what the intention is.
Me either. And what about the accountability statement they want to add? Who would we be accountable to? What would the consequences be if someone decides that we are not doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love? What is a spiritual discipline of love anyway?
Be sure to watch part 2, where we will try to decode some of the new words in the proposed values and covenant section. Deciding what UU is going to be about is in our hands. Now is the time to continue the conversation. Let's be wise and prudent caretakers of this religion.